Hey, Ian.
Yeah.
You're not here next to me anymore, but we're doing an emergency podcast.
Big news. Big. What could we be? What would be so important that we had to do an emergency session?
Well, it's actually one of the good times where I didn't finish editing the podcast in time because we recorded on Tuesday, and I've been having a back and forth with book proofing, getting page samples, and that. So usually the podcast would have been out by now. But now Thursday morning, I woke up to news and I quickly texted Ian that Atari has acquired the Intellivision game library and the trademark / branding, which basically means this Intellivision as we know it is gone. That's the long and the short of it.
The failed Tommy experiment is basically come to an end.
So what are your initial thoughts in general? Because this is divorced from the Amico in terms of the business deal.
Yes. So, I mean, so if I think of it without any connection to the Amico, it makes sense to me in divorcing myself from the fact that Atari has had issues and things like that. It makes sense to me for a company that most people think of as, kind of like the early days of video games, the dawn of video game stuff. It makes sense for the one that is doing better to, I think, acquire the library of a company that doesn't really have any output avenues anymore, because people tend to think of these games as all in the same, from the same era, and it basically puts them in the hands of a company where, and we all know we've had issues with Atari in the past, it puts these games in the hands of a company that will actually do something with them. Hopefully. It's a better scenario than where it was. I don't feel great about it, but it's definitely something that is better than letting the Intellivision licenses languish and be attached to, Amico nonsense and things like that.
Well, in recent years, the only thing that we have really seen Intellivision use their past games have been the Evercade re-releases, right? That's been really the main thing that we know about, and that's a niche audience, and most casual gamers are unaware of that. If they're not even aware of the Evercade, let alone the Intellivision, packs of games. But you have
to already be into the Evercade, and while I think the Evercade is a great product that succeeds in what it wants to do, that's already a niche in and of itself.
However, those same people have probably heard of the name Atari. They know Atari. They've known Atari from, good or bad from the past news. They've been in the news for a lot trying to do NFTs, which we ragged on, and obviously the hotel and the crypto crap that we ragged on. But they've also, done Atari 50, which is, I've said famously or infamously or whatever, people know that I've said it's arguably arguably the best retro game compilation ever made. And that's
Digital Eclipse is doing, but Atari at least had the foresight to let someone with skill handle their past properties.
Yes.
And what was smart about that is by putting it in a package like that, you've made the whole library more attractive as something that you learn about, as opposed to just throwing out basic ROM copies of shit like, I don't know, real sports football that no one wants to play.
Sure. So Atari's is better positioned, and it's at this point, the public, Atari is, pre-NES video gaming is Atari to everyone. Mm-hmm. It's not ColecoVision. It's not Intellivision. It's not Odyssey 2 or Odyssey 1. It's not the Astrocade. It's not the RCA Studio 2. Am I missing one? It's none of these. It's none of them. It's Atari.
And I guess that was my point, was that, if there is a modern entity that is going to be a steward of pre-NES era gaming, Atari's kind of in the best position for it now.
Well, they have the money. Obviously they bought Digital Eclipse. They bought Moby Games, which I wasn't pleased about either of those deals on their surface, but they're at least trying to get into the space that the best they can, and abandoning weird projects like the Atari VCS that really don't make sense. Like, at least they're getting out of that business and more into their wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. So that's the good news. So that's my initial thoughts. And the other thoughts was, well, what else can Atari acquire at this point that would make sense? And the Intellivision library is the closest thing to the 2600 games because they, that was the original console war, was those two.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It kind of makes sense from a business standpoint to go in that direction. Hopefully they didn't pay that much, but we'll get into that. So there was a press release put out that we should probably go through here.
Let me take a little sippy sip of water here and dive in.
I'll do the lead. Atari acquires Intellivision brand. Purchase of Intellivision trademarks and games unites competing brands from the 70s and 80s.
Atari, one of the world's most iconic consumer brands and interactive entertainment producers, announced today it has purchased the Intellivision brand in certain games from Intellivision Entertainment LLC. Intellivision Entertainment LLC will rebrand and continue its business of developing and distributing the Amico brand game console with a license from Atari to continue to distribute new versions of the Intellivision games on the Amico console.
All right, we'll stop you right there. I love the fact that they immediately divorce from the Amico within the first or second sentence. That's the first sentence. They immediately divorced from that abomination of an idea and project. Like they have to do that.
Yeah, right. Atari will seek to expand digital and physical distribution of legacy Intellivision games, potentially create new games, and explore brand and licensing opportunities as part of a long-term plan to create value from the Intellivision properties.
Okay. Any thoughts on that? Expanding the digital physical distribution?
It's a long shot, but I do think, I would love to go through the Atari library in the same way that I did the Atari.
You need television the same way as the Atari.
The entire in the Intellivision library the same way I went through the Atari library. Whether or not people will determine if that's worth the time to create, we'll see. But I do think that would excite me.
Yeah,
I would love to do that.
So they're basically applying their same approach of how they've used their Atari in-house games. Okay, we're going to expand distribution. Okay, so that can be packs of games. That could be an Intellivision 50 sort of thing when the 50th anniversary comes up in 5 years. They can do 45, I guess, this year if they wanted to. And then was it 70 or 79? I forget. I think it was 79. End of 79.
It was 79. That's what I always have gone by, anyways.
And then also. They can do how we've had upgrades to Asteroids games the past, Centipede and games like that. Do upgraded versions of the Intellivision games. I'm saying that's the strategy, right? We'll talk about.
I'm gonna say.
We'll talk about the viability of doing that later, but that's the strategy.
One of my favorite things about the Digital Eclipse packages is Mike Mika always does updated versions of some of the games. He did an updated Yars that just looks beautiful, but it runs underneath, or it runs right on top of the original code. He did a great version of Grid Runner for the Llamasoft collection. And what I want to get, what I'm trying to bring around here is Atari has these Intellivision licenses now. They also own Digital Eclipse, and I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that people who were initially interested in the Amico for the Cloudy Mountain and whatever the other game is, Night Stalker, you might actually get to see those. So that's kind of interesting just to think about, because now you have everything in one place and it could potentially happen.
Sure, but I mean, you could have put out those games and just called them something else, but yes. You
could have. I'm just saying now there is an avenue for it to make sense for them to spend time on.
Okay. Speaking of little quotes here from Wade Rosen here.
Yeah. Uniting Atari and Intellivision after 45 years ends the longest running console war in history, said Mike Mika, studio head at Digital Eclipse, an Atari-owned game studio.
It's a cute quote, but obviously it hasn't been a war in 40 years. It's just a cute quote. But
no, but I mean, as someone who followed the Amico and shit Tommy said, I do think it's pretty funny to see that in print. The first Intellivision home video game console was released by Mattel Electronics in 1979, and the console platform sold an estimated 5 million units through 1990. Atari and Intellivision arguably fought the first console war of consequence in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Mattel went as far as enlisting the actor George Plimpton to appear in a series of ads comparing the two systems, as well as an 8-minute-long video shown at the Gamescom trade show.
I'll stop you real quick. I've seen that 5 million number tossed around before, and I don't want to get into it's not a huge deal, But my thought on that is that's like inflated. Like during the actual like heyday of Intellivision for the 3 or 4 years, I believe it came in a bit lower than that. And then at that point, well, maybe it sold a bunch more. But I've seen people say like that could be an inflated number. That's all. It's obviously in the low millions, but okay.
I have thoughts about some of this stuff too that I'll bring up at the end. This was a very rare opportunity to unite former competitors and bring together fans of Atari, Intellivision, and the golden age of gaming, said Wade Rosen, chairman and CEO of Atari.
Okay, real quick on that. There's no longer like Atari versus Intellivision fanboys.
No,
they're fans of both. Like for example, Joe DeRosa. The comedian, he's a big fan of both Atari and Intellivision. Like if you grew up with that stuff at this point, you want as much of that pre-NES as possible, and you almost don't care where it comes from.
Right. At this point, you're enjoying a style of game,
Yes.
not a company. You know, it's you like pre-NES gaming.
Sure.
The purchase includes the rights to more than 200 titles from the Intellivision portfolio and the Intellivision trademarks. Do you want to get into that? Or
We'll get into that after.
Okay. Atari has been a valuable partner, and we have every confidence they will be a responsible steward of the storied Intellivision brand, said Phil Adams, CEO of Intellivision Entertainment, after shitting himself. We look forward to our expanded collaboration in bringing a broad array of new Atari and Intellivision titles to the Amico and Amico home family gaming platform.
That to me smells of you have to include this in the press release for us to have a deal.
So, okay, that's what I was going to say. When it comes back to the 5 million, that sort of thing, that sort of pumping up of the Intellivision brand, that reeks of Tommy and Phil Adam. I don't think that would have been in there unless it was part of the deal.
And they're probably like, well, whatever. We'll just say 5 million. It's probably 2 or 3, but we'll just say 5.
Yes,
and they didn't care.
And there's more on the Amico later on that I swear is only in there because it had to be part of the deal.
The Wikipedia on that literally says units sold, and it says just greater than 3.75 million, 80 to 83, and there's some quotations. So we'll just say it's even 3 to 4, and they just tacked on another million that sold in the last 7 years of its existence, which is obviously not true. Which
is bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, if you told me they sold 20,000, 50,000, maybe 50,000 in 7 years, I'd believe you at that point.
I can recall seeing even occasional Atari games in places like Toys R Us or at certain stores, all the way up to about 90. I think I bought Atari 5200 games from a Dollar Tree in like 1991. I don't remember ever seeing an Intellivision game for sale.
Yeah, not in this country probably, but okay.
Right.
All right, back to the little press release.
So, to mark the occasion, new Intellivision t-shirts are available starting today on Atari.com with more Intellivision apparel and collectibles to come.
They'll sell in the tens, so that's great. Back to the Phil Adam quote real quick, I forgot to say. Expanded collaboration. I think this is funny because, like, I don't think Phil Adam's going to have an active role at all.
No.
And keep him around for any of this. But again, this is probably... Save face, put it in the press release. I don't think Phil Adams is going to be salaried under Atari. I don't think that it's like, great, we just bought your stuff that you're not doing anything with, and goodbye.
And I'll also say this, I think it happened very quickly. Because they did not rebrand before this happened. They're still referring to Phil Adam as CEO of Intellivision Entertainment, even though Intellivision Entertainment, as we know it, no longer exists.
Sure. So it's been dissolved. So it's like Phil Adams, CEO of whatever the hell the Amico company is. Like that's what it is now.
Yeah, exactly. Had this happened with a little bit more forethought, they wouldn't be saying Intellivision Entertainment. It would be Phil Adams, CEO of AmicoBoys.com or whatever. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. A press kit including the Atari and Intellivision logos and new Intellivision t-shirts can be found here. There's a link.
All right.
Stay up to date, blah, blah, blah. About Atari. Atari is as an interactive entertainment company, an iconic gaming brand, Roller Coaster Tycoon. We don't really have to go through any of this. About Amico.
Okay, yeah, this is the fact that this is even in the press release.
This is what I was going to bring up to make the point you made earlier was this is in here because it was part of the deal. About Amico, with a mission to bring people together by delivering simple, affordable, family-friendly entertainment, Amico and Amico Home are unique video game platforms that will redefine home entertainment with family and friends. The Amico video game console is currently under development. No, it's not. Meanwhile, Amico Home is the Amico console gaming experience delivered on other hardware platforms that many people already own. Amico Home is currently available on Android and coming soon to Apple iOS. Additional platforms and devices are planned in the future. More information can be found at amico.club.
Yeah.
And then Amico Home, and all other trademarks are property of their respective owners. Again, we don't really know what to call the respective owners.
Sure.
And that's it. That's the press. That's the press release.
Yeah, and on Twitter they just said we acquired the Intellivision brand and game library. Clap, and with Wade Rosen's quote, "The former Intellivision will rebrand and continue distribution of the Amico console." So again, Atari is divorcing themselves of the Amico as quickly as they can, so there's no confusion, because they know how bad that looks to them, and that's what I tweeted out. Where's my tweet on it? That. I tweeted out probably the most logical outcome after Tommy Tallarico and the Amico project decimated the Intellivision brand and legacy the past several years. In my head, I'm like, we never said it publicly, but I mean, we might have actually that Atari could buy this somewhere. But I was always thinking this could probably happen, because they probably asked for more than what it's worth, and Atari has the money to say, okay, whatever, we'll give you an extra 100,000 more than it's probably worth just to have it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Atari
I think
can
it was
do that.
kind of unspoken, especially once Atari bought Digital Eclipse.
Yeah.
I started thinking, well, they were buying those other game libraries. I did not think it would be too far behind before Intellivision could potentially be on the chopping block there.
Okay, so
because they didn't want to do anything with those games. They didn't want to bring them to the Amico, despite the fact that they said it. The only lip service they gave to those games was the packs for the Evercade. Yeah. So I felt like they could easily be on the chopping block. Clearly, they didn't care about them, because they gave the two big ones, Astro Smash and Shark to an unknown BBG Entertainment.
Well, we'll get into that. That's the thing. It's like, that's why they couldn't say we bought all the games, because they didn't.
Right, yes.
They didn't buy two of the mainstays there, which is troublesome. But okay, they claim over 200 titles, which doesn't line up to anything I've seen online. Even unless there's a bunch of prototypes and unreleased games that are even not on Wikipedia. That's interesting. So if you actually count up the ones that are published by Mattel Electronics, who were the original publisher of Intellivision games, and INTV Corp, which then obviously launched off it in, 83, 84, up until 90, you get to a total of about 90 titles published, including educational ones.
Right.
43 unreleased games this is me, I might be off by a couple, and then 16 Tudor Vision educational games, and that was an unreleased entity. That gets you about 150, roughly.
So is Tudor Vision supposed to be a system or something, or
yes,
a line of games that never came out?
It was going to be an educational line of things. So that gets you to about 150. You're still at least 50 away. But even when you drill down, that the number of actual ones you could probably release diminishes. And that's what we're going to get into, because of the properties and IPs that are attached to some of them on the surface. So we can go through some of those, but obviously on the surface, you can't release the Tron games without Disney's blessing. You can't do it. And those are 3 or 4 games right there that you can't do.
3, I think. The Dungeons and Dragons ones are big ones.
You can't do Dungeons and Dragons without getting the IP rights back. You can't
start to run into that problem that you run into kind of with Atari, where people assume that games that were popular on the system were, Atari games like Pac-Man, but they weren't. They were Namco, like Burger Time. I mean, I'm sure you could probably get the license for that, but that wasn't an Intellivision game. Correct. And that was popular.
It was popular there, but it wasn't. They don't have the rights to that. And then, like a lot of the sports games, this is what Kevtris said. You have to rename them or probably ROM hack these, because remember, they're like Major League Baseball. They don't have the rights to Major League Baseball, NBA basketball, NFL football, NHL hockey, PBA bowling, PGA golf. You have to hack those up. If whatever license or name appears, you can't put those games out as is. Not that those are beloved titles, but to some people it's a big deal. But you got those. Then obviously you have a lot of the mainstays that we talked about before: Armor Battle, Frog Bog, Lock and Chase. That's a property. You have to get the rights to that name for Lock and Chase, correct?
Lock and Chase is Data East.
So like Night Stalker. Okay, you got that. Sea Battle. Shark, you don't have anymore. As we said about a year ago, they sold them to BBG Entertainment the rights to Shark, and Astro Smash. And because BBG Entertainment worked on the new Shark. So they got in with them and then said, well, we might as well buy the rights and the trademark to those two games. So the deal at the time with Intellivision was, well, Intellivision can put them on future Intellivision consoles. If Intellivision does a new console, they can still put out Shark, and Astro Smash. Otherwise, BBG owns the rights to those. So Atari would have to go to BBG and ask permission and license those for any pack of games or compilation, which is sad. We always said, like, this is what happens when you break up and cannibalize a library. It becomes worth a lot less on its surface. And those are two main Intellivision games that a casual fan of retro games probably would maybe know one of those, but like getting rid of those, they're not going to know a Sea Battle. They're not going to know a Sub Hunt. They're not going to know. They're not going to know Sharp Shot. They're not going to know those games. But they might know Shark or might know Astro Smash. There's a chance, you know.
Yeah.
Then there's more here, like Space Hawk and Star Strike, which, again, non-Intellivision fans don't care about these things. Even the backgammon game has a license from the ABPA, which I don't know if that's still around.
Wow.
So the chess, the USCF, which still exists, I used to be rated that in high school. So you have to get the license from the U.S. Chess Federation. Like, so there's a bunch of these games on the surface you just can't put out. Like, that's, to me, kind of sad, but also, I guess, part and parcel for what this deal is.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely can strip away the licensing from it, but
can't do Kool-Aid Man.
Well, that was also on Atari.
You can't do Masters of the Universe. So all of a sudden you go to, okay, well, how many games are actually viable? To, you know, like what's a viable re-release plans for these games? Again, a retro compilation like Intellivision 45 or 50, sure, right?
Yeah.
But outside of that, I don't know.
Yeah, neither do I. I mean, literally, that's all I can think of is something like that. That would at least be worth mentioning or worth noticing.
Intellivision Lives, which is one of the earlier, retro game compilations. Late 90s was the first version on Windows. They had 60 games there. 60 games. So that gives you an idea at the time of what was viable, probably. Well, we'll put on as much as we can. And most of that looks like it's first party on there. And let's see. And there's a bunch of unreleased games on top of that. They're probably on the Wikipedia page. Looks like there's about 20 unreleased games in that package. So again, they were struggling, not struggling, but even on that, there was no Tron game. Looks like they didn't get the rights to the Tron games for that pack. They didn't get some of the sports games rights. So that shows you the struggle of having a library of games where you don't own the entire IP of all those games. Like, that's not the business you want to be in overall. We see it with, on the re-releases of Tecmo Bowl on the NES Classic. They have to strip out all the player names, for example. They have to do things like that. And that's just the reality of it. So,
yeah. So, I mean, I mean, I don't think it was a great necessarily a smart move by Atari, but yeah, now that you have them, they're in the hands of someone better off than where they were. What do you do with them? And I guess you put them in a collection. I would imagine that if Atari just bought this whole collection, they'll probably try to buy the rights to Astro Smash and Shark back.
You think so? Because otherwise it's almost like,
I do.
What's the point?
I don't think that those are going to be pricey enough to hurt Atari's pockets, and it's absolutely stupid to imagine. It's not like they're great games, although I really do kind of. I like the simple back and forth of the score in Astro Smash.
Well, but
they're not great games, but like you said, they're iconic, and the Intellivision lineup without those is, I don't know. It's like having the Nintendo lineup but no Mario.
Yeah, but from we heard, we don't know. They paid upwards of six figures for the rights to those games. That's ridiculous. So, like, an Atari, if you put a gun to my head, I would say Atari paid $250,000 for all of this, and that might be high, because most of these games are not viable properties you can make money off of. They just aren't. There's like 15 properties probably out of 200 you can actually do a reimagined game of, or include in a retro game re-release or an Evercade pack, like, and those already come out. So at this point, like, what is actually here that people want to play? And there's like 15 games. And out of those games, you got to get the rights to Dungeons and Dragons or Tron in order to do anything with.
Or strip them down completely and remake them as something else.
So that's what I mean. Like, if it was 250,000, I'd say that sounds reasonable. If you said it was only 50,000, I'd say that's too low. If you said it was 500,000, I'd say that's crazy. I'd say to you, like, that's crazy, because I don't think they're going to make their money back unless they really have a long tail of, okay, Intellivision 50, we'll do it in Intellivision console, FPGA, or what have you, include some games.
Right.
Then I'm like, okay, now I'm thinking of ways that you can squeeze
wouldn't get an FPGA. They don't even do that for their own systems.
They will eventually, because they don't have any choice.
I guess we'll see.
That's a hit against Atari for the latest 2600 release.
Maybe
So
someone else will come up to us at Portland and ask us to be nice to Atari.
So the preservation side, like you went through, it's good to have a good steward of this that isn't trying to run a weird console project on the side. Atari VCS notwithstanding, since they still sell that, it's always marked down. All right. Now we can bring it back to the Intellivision, the Amico, the blank Amico. How does this relate to the chance of the Amico coming out at all? Absolutely none, because the amount of money that Intellivision gained from this is going to be paying off all the debts to their own loans and to Sudesh. Remember the guy that took the loan out and also is going to get $100 per sale? They have loans due and on overdue at this point. All the loans that they gave out, all the creditors of Intellivision, that's who this money is going to probably have to go to, or Phil's going to pay his own salary with this money. Like, that's what's happening.
Yeah, and let me remind people that this could be $1 million. If it, I don't say it, but if they paid $1 million for it, it still wouldn't affect the chances of the Amico coming out.
Correct.
The Amico team blew $17 million
just from the Republic, not counting the private loans. Yeah,
and all they ever manufactured and showed for it was 3D printed shells, a controller, and 40 announced games that boils down to like 6 that are available, and there is nothing else on the roadmap for this system. We still don't have Rigid Force Redux on there, and we still don't have Finnegan Fox on there. Both games that were supposed to be out last month.
On the Amico Home, yeah.
On the Amico Home, and both games that were already done. Both games that were supposed to be on Amico Home, and the current voice of the Amico side is John Alvarado, and he said Finnegan Fox was supposed to come up, but there's still some unfinished stuff on the business end. And I don't know how anyone spins that positively. That means they were like, "Oh, you're publishing this? You're going to pay us all the money you owe us now," and they don't have that money. There's just there's nothing there.
And it's not gonna matter anyway, because remember, like, Astro Smash is still sitting on Google Play at 100 plus downloads, which means again less than 250. Well, yeah. There's no interest.
Right. There's no interest, and there's nothing else. They've run out of tarmac.
Yeah. And then this is what we get into though. Now we're at the sad state. It's almost poetic that we got on Intellivision for leaning into them trying to be propped up, the console propped up by this crusty old derelict of a brand. And then we got attacked by the CEO for it, right? Then they leaned into that in all their marketing on their awful, Neil Patel, inside information investor video, leaning into Intellivision has all this history, when even the federal document that from Start Engine said, this Intellivision company has nothing to do with the original Intellivision console 40 years ago. Literally says that in a federal investment document. They went through all that rigmarole. We called them out constantly. They said, "Oh no, this is still the original Intellivision," even though the feds would come after us if we tried to defraud people saying that, which they kind of did here and there. Now that's gone anyway. That's gone. They can't even use that anymore.
As much as they said they weren't trying to lean on that name, and they weren't trying to leverage the Intellivision brand. I mean, they patterned the controller exactly after it. I mean,
Correct.
I mean, one of the biggest problems, and we don't need to go back into it, is just the fact that there was no messaging in the marketing. Oh, it's for moms if I'm talking to a mom. It's for a retro gamer if I'm talking to a retro gamer. It's for families if I'm talking to a family guy. And heaven forbid anyone bring up how it's not actually, and they'll be like, well, it's not for you.
The last, I can play it, but I won't play it. The literal last video on Intellivision's YouTube channel from, what is it, 2 years ago at this point? February 7th, 2022, that they used for Start Engine, I believe, called the Intellivision Amico Family Trailer. Starts with a video game history segment about the original Intellivision. It starts within 10 seconds, goes into a spiel about them versus Atari up until a minute in. Again, when their investment document literally said this company has nothing to do with Mattel's original Intellivision product 40 years ago.
Yep.
They had the balls to try to tell the public and me and Ian that there was a connection, but now they can't even lean on that anymore. That's gone. We knew that the Amico was dead, but not even having the tenuous fake connection to the original Intellivision means it's not just 6 feet under, it's like buried under Chernobyl. Like, I mean, it's so far down and dead at this point with no connection.
Yeah.
That's all they have. And the amount of copium that's probably going on in the, Intellivision Amico Facebook, and I don't know if people are still promoting on Atari Age, which would be funny because now Atari owns Atari Age. I just think it's incredible we got to this point where it went from we're going to outsell the Atari VCS, we're going to sock it to Atari. These are Tommy Tallarico's words, not mine. To now, well, they bought us out and we're done. Like that's what happened within 4 years.
Yep.
Like, you can't mismanage a brand or a company almost worse than you can't.
No, you can't. You can't. I mean, this was just an abject failure.
Like, I'm not even trying to brag. It's sad. It's really sad. It's sad that you couldn't even properly steward. Like, there was no pressure on this brand in order to do much with it because no one would have expected it. But you tarnished it. You diminished its value to whoever was on the board of directors still of the Intellivision LLC for these properties. You made it worth less because the Amico was such a fucking disaster and will forever be tied to the Intellivision name. And now you just sell it off because there's nothing left for you because you're a joke. That's what happened. Atari was probably like, well, this is great for us, the Amico, because now this is worth less and less the more years go by. The 2 games sold notwithstanding. Like, they probably would have loved to have bought it a year ago, before it was totally,
Well, and a few of the biggest cheerleaders for the system were largely interested in it because of the Intellivision name.
Correct.
We haven't mentioned their names, and I'm not going to mention them now, but there's one guy who talks about it, and all he's got behind him is his Intellivision collection. There's a group on Facebook, and a lot of the people who post still in there post because they're posting about Intellivision games and homebrews. It's not the Amico. I can see a lot of these guys who were paying attention to it simply because it was attached to Intellivision. I think this is finally where they might be like, okay, well, that's it. Intellivision's with Atari now, and the Amico's not part of it, and we're just going to forget about it.
Yeah, I'm not going to.
They're going to follow the name. They're not going to keep following the Amico without the name.
I'm not going to call them out because it's not a personal shot at them. But there's a journalist we've discussed on this show before with several 100,000 Twitter followers that tweeted out excitement about the Intellivision Amico because they grew up with the Intellivision. And then me and other people pointed out, well, this has nothing to do with the original Intellivision, but that's how they tricked people. That's how they tricked investors. That's how they tricked everyone to give them money and pre-orders. But this is why and on that level, it's absolutely a scam when you're lying about the association to the previous Intellivision. And speaking of investors, at what point is Phil Adam, the CEO of who knows what it is anymore, because it's not Intellivision,
going to address anything that has to do with the investors? I don't know. Maybe never.
It's been 6 months, Phil, since you spoke to the investors. What's going to happen, Phil, when the investors find out that, wow, well, the branding is totally gone from our console, and now we can't easily use any of the IPs for future modern games? Well, like, where are we at with that? It still says Intellivision Amico on the Republic page. That's got to be removed. Like it literally would have to be going forward, I would think. You can't still have an investment up for something that says Intellivision Amico when it's not Intellivision. You literally don't have the rights to call it Intellivision Amico anymore anywhere. You can't.
You cannot.
What a disaster. Yeah, Phil won't. They will, like, I'd have so much more respect for someone like Phil, instead of just sitting around and just I guess collecting a check from whatever, from Intellivision Entertainment, just to say, yeah, this is dead, and we just sold off the rights to anyone. Which, by the way, the investors have zero rights to any of this money because they invested in the Amico console, not into Intellivision Holdings LLC or whatever as an entity. Yeah. So they get screwed every which way on this. So yeah, again, I think Atari, you're going to see it in Intellivision. I mean, like Keith Robinson was such a nice guy, and to see this happen to it, I mean, God, he probably couldn't imagine.
If Atari, I feel like the very, very simple answer here is Atari is going to give that library to Digital Eclipse. Digital Eclipse is going to do something with it. You will have a television collection with whatever they can get in there that will do the system justice in the eyes of fans. It would be something that Keith Robinson would be happy with, and that will be the Intellivision's legacy.
Yeah, I guess so. Like, I'm not even going to postulate on how much worse they would do than Atari 50 due to the branding being, so much. No one knows about Intellivision. No 20-year-old knows about Intellivision, compared to, I might have heard of Atari. I might have seen it. Like the numbers don't even equate. It might be a 10-to-1 ratio of brand recognition. That might be actually underballing what the brand recognition is between Atari. It could be 50-to-1. So,
I mean, they could do something like Atari presents the Intellivision collection. I mean, you can find a way to make the title grab someone who doesn't necessarily know.
Atari is so much more interesting as a company since they helped pioneer both arcade gaming and home console. Like Intellivision doesn't have close to that. So that's again the issue. Like, well, Intellivision didn't have arcade games that they could bank on. So okay, it's really a 3.5 year run is what you're looking at before everything fell apart. Like that's Intellivision, 79 to 82. It's like 3 years before no one cared anymore. Well, Atari went up until 72. Until you could say the wheels started falling off after the Jaguar in the early to mid 90s. At least you had like a 25, 30 year run there, right? Where it's like, that's a real run of a company, right? Mm-hmm. And then of course it went through changes here and there and they split off with a couple different Atari companies, but 25 years of games you can present over several consoles versus one console that really was popular for 2 years. Like so that's what I mean. Like, I'm not saying Digital Eclipse don't do it and Atari don't do it. You should do something to the same quality. I'm just saying it's going to be a lot harder to work with than all the interesting stories and interesting things that Atari did.
Because I mean, the thing about the Atari 50th collection is at the end of the day, you got a lot of games on there that no one wants to play. So you make the games interesting and you make them playable to people by surrounding them with the history of the company.
Sure.
Television doesn't have a history.
But people have been, one of the reasons Atari is remaining in people's eyes, because whenever you go to a barcade, whenever you go into arcade, there's Atari arcade games there to remind you that Centipede's a game, to remind you that Asteroids exists. We're not even counting, the mid '80s games, which aren't technically tied anymore, like 720 and APB and Road Blasters and that great run. Even that sort of reminds me of Atari. There's nothing in the public to remind you of Intellivision at all. Nothing.
No.
Outside of the
Amico.
Yes, outside of an H Bomber Guy video that'll probably come out going over the Amico disaster. A 2-hour. That's going to be the legacy. Mm-hmm. So. There you have it. It wasn't a victory lap. It's actually good news overall, in a way. That and
anything that got those properties away from those people was good.
Yeah, because good. Yeah, Phil Adams not going to care about it, and Tommy, who knows where Tommy's at nowadays? It'd be funny to see him put out a comment about it. It's like, hey, you helped end the company finally after all. Well, it's obviously gone through changes, but you helped just run it into the ground where it had to be sold off before a bunch of creditors just picked it apart from lawsuits and bankruptcy hearings. So I guess that's better. It stays together with the company. I guess that's better.
I wonder if that's part of the impetus. They were like, we got to get rid of this before it becomes something that can be
picked apart
for
even less money. Probably. I would have bid on packs of IP games. Hey, I'll bid 15,000 on Star Strike and whatever else is in there. One of the Tron games.
Right.
All right. Anything else, Dad?
No. I'm glad we got this session in, and yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to watch what happens with the Amico over the next month. And it was already, I mean, even the diehards weren't posting stuff on it. I think we're going to watch it just fade away.
Well, it has been fading away for over a year.
Well, I mean, I think this really is going to be the final nail in the coffin.
You mean
I think the people who have been hanging on the most are people who are still interested in the Intellivision name. And without that, I think they're going to use that. I'm hoping it causes some self-reflection, and they might use that moment to quietly exit the Amico landscape.
This is their chance.
Okay, it's done.
It's their chance to step away from the cult, basically. And be
it is their last chance to step away, and I would not say that's going to be with dignity, but it's better than if they hold on for another 6 months to a year.
Sure, and play these games on their cell phones. Try to get that going. Yeah, that just sounds awful. Sounds worse and worse. All right, well, thanks for coming on board for the emergency podcast segment that I'm going to insert in to the podcast edit. And now we'll go back to our regularly scheduled banter.